What's going on, YouTube? This is SG1 Sports, and you're watching our college football channel. We're going to continue here with our projected record series and previewing each team's schedules. The Florida Gators are up next. Before we get to the 2024 schedule, let's look back at 2023. And here is this 2023 schedule for Florida. Again, this was the schedule that we ranked as the toughest schedule in college football. There were other schedule rankings I saw out there that did not have Florida as number one as far as the number one toughest schedule. But my rankings, the formula that I used to rank the schedules, they did have the toughest schedule. And it did prove to be a very tough one. And, I think Florida was better than a lot of 6-6 teams last year, but their schedule was just really tough. And that's why they didn't make it to a bowl game, which is why I predicted them to go 5-7 in the preseason. As you take a look at the schedule, again, they had to play Utah and Florida State in the non-conference, but their non-conference schedule this year might be even tougher. Yes, it is a tough schedule. You look at who they played out of the SEC West. They had to play Arkansas and LSU, which turned out to not be as tough as we thought. LSU was not quite as good as I thought they were going to be. Arkansas was a lot worse than I thought they were going to be. And Tennessee was not as good as I thought they were going to be. Missouri was better than I thought they would be. So the schedule, it turned out, I think, to not be quite as tough as we thought in the preseason, but still was a really tough schedule and a big reason why they went 5-7. So here's the 2024 schedule. And before we go game by game, let's break it down. We'll start with the non-conference. They'll play Miami, Samford, UCF, and Florida State. They'll play Florida State on the road. It's hard to say right now how tough this non-conference schedule really is, but we expect Miami to be pretty good. We expect UCF to be pretty good, and we expect Florida State to be really good. And so you've got three tough games there. Samford is really the only gimme on their schedule. They don't even get to play Vanderbilt this year, so it's a really tough schedule. But the non-conference schedule here, again, it looks like it's going to be tough. It's hard to say just how tough. I mean, is this going to be a brutal non-conference schedule against three top 25 teams? That's possible. Or perhaps Miami struggles again. UCF isn't great. Florida State's not as good as they were last year. And maybe it's not too bad, but it's definitely a respectable non-conference schedule. No doubt about that. You look at their home schedule, Miami, Samford, and UCF, non-conference games all at home. And then they get Texas A&M, Kentucky, LSU, and Ole Miss. Nice to not have to go on the road to play LSU. Of course, that's a tough place to play. Same thing with Texas A&M. Kentucky and Ole Miss, those might be winnable games. Texas A&M as well. So you've got some games at home that you can possibly win. And, I'm not going to say, out of these games right here, these 7 games, I'm not going to say there's no chance that Florida wins 6 of them. They could, they have a great home field advantage. They go 6-1 in these games, and they can get to a bowl game. Also, good news is the Georgia game, which is a neutral site game, of course. That is counted as a road game for them this year, which means they get 4 home games, 3 road games in the SEC, and then a neutral site game. So that works out. So it's not all bad for Florida. The schedule is really tough, but it's not all bad. You look at their road schedule, and I put Georgia in here as on the away side because it's not at home, even though it's a neutral site. But you got Florida State in the non-conference, of course. And then Mississippi State, tough place to play, but I don't know how good the Bulldogs are going to be. Tennessee, they beat them last year. You got Texas. That's going to be a really tough one. And then, like I said, Georgia. So let's look at the schedule. They start with Miami. That'll be the season opener there on August 31st. Then they get Samford on September the 7th. And again, that is their only gimme game. You look at the rest of the schedule. Do you see a game on the schedule where you'd say Florida has a 90% chance of winning other than Samford? I don't think so. I don't even know if you can say they have another game where they have a 75% chance of winning. I mean, it's tough. There are no breaks on the schedule outside of that Samford game. So they'll play Texas A&M. They'll open up the SEC play there on September the 14th at home. That's the good news. First 3 games all at home. Again, it's not all bad. Mississippi State on the road on September the 21st, first road game of the season. But again, a game where they're going to have a shot. I think that's close to a 50-50 game. You've got UCF on October the 5th. I don't know how good they're going to be, but that's a winnable game at home coming off of a bye week. So again, the start to the schedule, if you look at the first 5 games, not too bad. Now you look at the last 5 games and oh, wow. We'll get to those in a second. But after UCF, they'll play Tennessee on the road October the 12th. That'll be a tough one. Playing them on the road. Then they get Kentucky at home on October the 19th.
And so they'll go to their second bye week there before playing Georgia. And again, all teams will get 2 bye weeks this year. And the first 7 games, it's not horrible. That is not a horrible schedule. They might have to win 6 of them, though, to get to a bowl game because their final 5 games are that tough, which is kind of how it was this year. They lost a bunch of games there at the end. But yeah, first 7 games, tough. No easy wins in there other than Samford, but a lot of games where they're at least going to have a shot. And several games at home, Kentucky, UCF, Texas A&M, Miami, and then again that Samford game. So 5 games at home. If you go 5-2 though in those games, I don't know if they can win another one because the rest of the schedule again is that tough. We start with Georgia there on November the 2nd in Jacksonville. We know how good Georgia is expected to be. They're always, they are a premier program now in college football. Texas is going to be really, really tough. This is potentially a top 5 team this year. LSU is going to be tough. Get them at home. That's the good news, but still, that's going to be a tough game. Ole Miss is going to be tough. They've got a lot coming back. And then they close things out with Florida State in the rivalry game on November 30th. So I'm not going to say they have no chance to win a game in those final 5. Maybe they win against LSU or Ole Miss at home, find a win in there somewhere. And 5-2 in the first 7 games would get them to a bowl game. But I think really, seriously, they might need to go 6-1 in those first 7 games because that stretch at the end, I haven't compared all the stretches in college football, but I would say that has to be the toughest 5-game stretch for any team. We're talking about Georgia, Texas, LSU, Ole Miss, and Florida State. All of these teams, I believe, ranked in the top 13 this year, and none of them expected to drop off a ton next year. So overall, a tough schedule, not as bad as you might think when you just look at the teams, but that stretch at the end, again, that has to be the most brutal stretch in all of college football. Tough schedule for Florida once again in 2024. Here is where Florida was expected to be last season. Of course, finished 5-7. Our projection had them at 6-6. I personally predicted them to go 5-7. Athlon Sports predicted them to go 5-7. The over/under was at 5.5. So this is a team that was expected to be 5-7 or 6-6, and they did wind up at 5-7. Could have very easily been 6-6 though, if you look back at their season last year. Had some close games, had some close calls for sure. It's just such a tough schedule. It was such a tough schedule last year and such a tough schedule this year. It just makes it to where, again, the projections are not going to be great. You can see, again, 5-7 last year. Here's the 2024 schedule, and this is the scale that we use. If it's under 20, over 80, those are games where I think it's almost a guarantee who's going to win. Yeah, those upsets do sometimes happen, but those games, we count those as wins and losses. 20-29, 71-80, those are games that are considered teams where pretty big favorites, 10 to 16 points, maybe in that range. Then you've got your 30 to 39 and 61 to 70% games. Those are games where I think the spread will be closer to a touchdown, 6, 7, 8 points, kind of in that range. And then your 50-50 games, they'll stay in the white. Those are games that could really go either way. Games where I think the spread will be less than 6. So for Florida, we'll start with the easy wins, and they've only got one of them, and that's Samford. That is the only easy win on the schedule. In fact, it's the only game on this schedule where I think Florida is going to be a clear favorite. I think every other game, they're either going to be an underdog or maybe a slight favorite. That's, again, just how tough this schedule is. So you've got one win there. You can count on that one. If they lose that game, then Billy Napier is going to be fired. But he'll be fired anyways, depending on how this season goes. I actually think Florida is a better team than a lot of people are giving them credit for. But, again, it's just the schedule. It's brutal. So you've got LSU and Florida State. These are games where I think Florida is going to be favored, or is going to be an underdog by about a touchdown. I don't think they're going to be huge underdogs in these games. LSU, this is I don't have them as a top tier team, but they're still going to be up there and probably a top 15 team, potentially better. But it's at Florida, so I think they're going to have a chance in that game. If they're going to pull off a big upset, that's probably the most likely game to happen. Then Florida State, I think Florida State's going to be a better team, plus they're playing at home. But it's a rivalry game, so I think that gives Florida a chance. And I don't think Florida State's going to be as good as they were last year. So, yeah, they'll have a chance in both of those games. But I do think they will clearly be the underdog in both matchups and probably by about a touchdown. I think they'll be a bigger underdog against Tennessee, Georgia, and Ole Miss. I think you're looking at double-digit underdogs in these 3 games. I know they beat Tennessee last year, but
Tennessee, I think, is going to be better this year. Plus, the game is on the road. I can understand if maybe you want to put that game in the yellow. That's fine. I don't think it would really change the projection. But just with the tier system that I use, I do have Tennessee as a tier 2 team. And because that game is on the road, that's why that one is in the orange. And then Georgia, it's a neutral site game. It's a rivalry. So I'm not going to put that in the red. If you went by my tier system, that game would actually be in the red. But again, rivalry game, not on the road. It's on home, but it's not on the road. It's a neutral site. So that's why that one's in the orange. But again, you could make an argument for that game being in the red and putting Tennessee in the yellow, and then you're going to get the same projection. This is not a prediction. We're a long ways away from doing predictions. This is simply just a projection. Ole Miss also, I think, in the orange. I've got this team as a top 5 team this year. I think they're going to be really good. Even at home for Florida, I think Ole Miss is much, much better. And again, it's not impossible for Florida to win, but I think they're going to be double-digit underdogs. And then the one game where I'm just going to give them no chance, that's Texas. Texas also does figure to be a tier 1 team. Plus, this game is on the road. So if it was at home or neutral site, we might put it in the orange. But because it's on the road, I'm just going to go ahead and say Florida has no chance. I just do not see them going on the road and beating Texas. And so that means you've got 6 games. 6 games where Florida is going to be an underdog. And I think clearly an underdog. And then you have the other 6 games where it's either a game that could go either way, or maybe they're favored like this game against Samford. So if you want to get to a bowl game, there's your 6 games right there. Miami, Samford, Texas A&M, Mississippi State, UCF, and Kentucky. You win those games, you get to a bowl game, or maybe you lose one and you pull off an upset against, say, LSU. Like I said earlier, that might be their best chance at a big upset. It's going to be tough. It's going to be tough for this team to get to a bowl game. You look at the Miami game, I think Miami's probably going to be favored, but not by much. Texas A&M probably favored, but not by much. And again, those games are at home for Florida, so that's going to give them a chance. I'd probably say Florida will be favored on the road at Mississippi State. Again, not by much, maybe a field goal. I think they will be favored against UCF. UCF's the one game that I think is almost in the purple. I do think Florida's probably favored by 4 or 5 points in that one, but not quite the 6 or 7. And then Kentucky, that's a true toss-up. I really could see that game going either way. But again, if Florida can win all of these games, all their 50-50 games, and take care of Samford, they can get to a bowl game, but it's going to be tough. So the projection for them, it's not a bowl game. It's 5-7 because, again, the odds are going to say they're not going to win every 50-50 game. If they just split the 50-50 games, and let's say they go 3-2 in the 50-50 games, and they beat Samford, that puts them at 4-8. But again, the odds would say that they're going to pull off an upset against, an LSU or maybe a couple upsets here. Again, that's just what the odds would say. And it does get them up to 5-7. But again, a projection to not even go to a bowl game again for Florida with an absolutely brutal schedule, 5-7, just like last year. That is the projection. You guys agree? Do you disagree? Where do you see this team? Where would you project their record? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below.